Obsession. A true story. The unfolding of a very complex process of obsession, with its main roots planted deep in the mysterious soil of past incarnations, with many implications projected into the future of those involved. Hello everyone, and welcome to our discussion of the first chapter of the book Obsession, psychographed by Divaldo Franco from the spirit author Manuel Filomeno de Miranda. This is a study of obsession, and obsession could be defined as persistent negative thoughts from a spiritual entity. Have you had persistent negative thoughts or done persistently negative actions, or someone you know? We all have in some ways been connected to obsession, and in this book what we're going to do is look at the impact of obsession on the lives of a family, obsession of a teenager, a 15-year-old girl, and its impact on the lives of this family, the Santa Marias. And this study is very important for us to be able to understand the influence of spirits on our lives, and also specifically how we, as incarnates, can and should be able to respond to such obsession, and the wake-up call that it has for us to begin to think about our spiritual values in our lives. So with that in mind, we're going to begin with a brief prayer before we begin our discussion of the chapter. Dear God, as we begin this study of obsession, let us look into ourselves and understand that this particular study involves us in beginning a journey into self-awareness, in understanding the influences that we have on spirits around us, both incarnate and discarnate, and the influence that incarnate and discarnate spirits have on our lives. We are beginning a study which has immense significance for our lives, and we ask for your protection, and we ask for your mercy. As we begin our discussion today, we look into ourselves and we ask, what can we do to become closer to the Jesus consciousness? What can we do to become better, more loving spirits that are more connected to the model of Jesus Christ? In our daily actions, let's begin to examine how we think and feel and act. As we begin this study today, we look with great love and with great respect to all those who have influenced our lives on the incarnate and discarnate planes. Thank you, God, for this blessed incarnation, and thank you, God, for this opportunity to reflect upon our lives. And so be it. Let us now begin the discussion of Chapter 1. Chapter 1. Aggression. The moral imperfection of the obsessed person is often an obstacle to his own liberation. Medium's Book, Chapter 23, Item 252. It was a hot summer evening in Rio de Janeiro. Although many stars shone in the sky, the air was sticky. Inside a duplex apartment overlooking the ocean at Copacabana Beach, everything was ready for a well-planned party. Invitations had been sent out to a selected group of friends in the higher levels of society. The best caterers, hired to supply good food, drinks, and flawless service. The head waiter and some uniformed receptionists stood at the main entrance, a private hall, where the elevator stopped. A few steps away, the hostess and her husband, in formal clothes, greeted their friends as they came in. Small groups began to gather here and there, or moved about, their footsteps muffled by the expensive oriental rugs that covered the floor. Waiters circulated among the guests with their loaded trays of drinks and appetizers. For Colonel and Mrs. Constancio Mederos de Santa Maria, it was a rare and auspicious occasion to entertain such a selected gathering during which their daughter, a well-bred young lady of 15, was about to make her social debut. A man of principles, the Colonel had refused to have his daughter presented by the society columnist of the day at a well-publicized event, usually held at one of the famous international hotels, or even at the exclusive ballrooms of the Brazilian Foreign Office. Instead, he preferred to share his happiness with a few intimate friends at his own apartment. In order to be prepared for the great occasion, the girl had been sent to a school specialized in preparing professional models, where she was given careful social training. Of course, no one would think of allowing her to become a model, since at the time such a profession was regarded suspiciously by the traditional families. The girl was getting ready for college and intended to become a teacher. At 9:30, at his wife's request, Colonel Santamaria announced that their daughter would be brought into the large living room, which had been conveniently set for her night of glory. The orchestra began to play, thus formally opening the party. In her long evening gown of delicate white French muslin and tulle, the girl entered the room. She was slender and gay. A happy smile played upon her lips, her transparent light blue eyes contrasting with her rosy cheeks. On her elaborately dressed hair sparkled a little diamond crown. She looked like a fairy who stepped out of dreamland. As the music played, the guests welcomed her with cheers of joy. The impact of her beauty among them was obvious. Her parents glowed with pride, their hearts filled with the delusive happiness sought by everybody on the earth plane, which, being itself transient, lasts only a short while, not unlikely to leave traces of an inexplicable bitterness behind. The carpet that had been rolled out for the girl to walk on was taken away, and under a wave of applause, the father invited his daughter for the traditional waltz. As the orchestra played, father and daughter were carried away by their own emotions and personal recollections. Old and forgotten memories came back to him, the dreams of youth, his military ambitions, his first love, marriage, the war. Yes, the war. And he tried to shake this thought out of his mind as unsuitable for the moment. The girl had not had such a long past to remember, of course. Hers was a life just beginning, and there were dreams yet to come, like that moment, for instance, which she wished she could hold eternally, stopping time in happiness. Other couples began to dance, and the party gathered amidst laughter, drinks, and delicacies. At the proper time, the head waiter announced that dinner would be served shortly. There was still time for a special treat. Colonel Santamaria suggested that his daughter should play a little piece at the piano as a tribute to their guests. A general burst of applause was heard. Chairs were placed around the shiny plagal as ladies and gentlemen got ready to listen to the recital. Esther, the girl, sat at the piano confidently and started to play a gentle piece by Brahms, filling the air with a tender, sweet melody. Her parents, beaming with happiness, sat quietly and contently, absorbed in their daughter's performance. Even the heat of the night had somewhat subsided, and a mild breeze from the sea softened the air. Suddenly, the scene changed. At first, Esther showed a slight disturbance. Her Her delicate body seemed to bend forward as if under the impulse of an electric shock. Then, abruptly, she turned around and stared at her father with wide open eyes. She looked quite disfigured. Her countenance changed, a deathly pallor on her face. Sweat began to break out on her forehead and trickle down her cheeks. Soon her whole face glistened with abundant sweat. She stood up unsteadily as her body stiffened, looking frighteningly insane. Taken by surprise, nobody seemed to know what to do. The girl walked up to her stunned father and without a warning slapped him hard on the face. As he arose from his chair, his face contorted, she slapped him once again. It was an instant scandal. A few ladies began to cry, and a confused Colonel Santamaria found himself unconsciously returning the blow. The young girl began to shout furiously and had to be forced out and into her bedroom. A doctor among the guests volunteered to examine her. A sedative was given her without any prompt result. She was given a second dose. The party ended painfully, while the family withdrew soon to find themselves enveloped in abysmal, nameless sorrows. The sudden disturbance shortly came to alarming proportions. Greatly perturbed, Esther bombarded her father with crude words, totally unlike herself. The words streamed out of her mouth brutally, incoherently. Apparently her father's presence stimulated the flow of insults, as if the sight of him completely obliterated her reason. One could sense a long-nursed hatred coming up as from the bottom of her soul. Only by the first light of dawn she dropped off into a torpor, her body shaking convulsively from time to time. As the strange aggression took place, the family, utterly shocked by the extraordinary event, sank into a state of anguish. The remaining guests filed away, some discreetly, others rather conspicuously, but all disturbed. Only the doctor stayed longer, until the couple decided to retire to the room, physically prostrated and morally crushed, not understanding what had occurred. Happenings as this usually invite man to ponder seriously over the meaning of life, leading him into the search for spiritual values. Well, that is a very incredibly powerful set of events that happened to the Santamaria family. I bet you did not expect such dramatic events to happen. But it's important to realize here that this is an example of obsession. Persistent negative thoughts and influences from spirits. And it's also important to realize that this is something that Spiritism can help us understand. The Spirits book discusses the question, how much influence do spirits have on our lives? And the answers from the good spirits is much more than you can imagine. And what we're seeing here is really obsession from a discarnate enemy. We don't know where the enemy's coming from exactly. Is this an enemy of Esther? Is this an enemy of someone in the Santamaria family? The colonel? His wife? In the Gospel According to Spiritism, chapter 12, they discuss discarnate enemies. And I recommend to look particularly at item 6, where I'm translating here from an older version by Janet Duncan, translated by Janet Duncan here in the Gospel According to Spiritism. It says, "It is always possible to find enemies among incarnates and discarnates. Our enemies in the invisible world manifest themselves in their malice by means of obsession and subjugations, as can be frequently seen." So here we're seeing effectively an obsession or subjugation of Esther, right? Where she has literally become obsessed by someone, some entity, which has caused her to effectively hit her own father in the middle of an event which was supposed to celebrate her coming of age in this world, this fancy world of high-class society in Rio at the time. It's important also to look at this section a little bit more from the Gospel According to Spiritism, because it can help us to understand a little bit more what we're seeing here. The good spirits say, These obsessions and subjugations represent a kind of trial, which, as in other types of trials, help in the process of advancement, and for this reason the sufferer should accept them with a certain amount of resignation. So what we're being told here in the Gospel according to Spiritism is that this is a trial of our incarnation, and that we should accept them, although we should be resigned to accepting them, because it's not easy, it's not pleasant. We're going to see in the next chapter that Esther is going to be taken to a mental hospital. This is not easy to deal with, especially since she was expected to effectively become part of this community, this high-class community in Rio. An event like this will stain her entire reputation and that of her family. And so we need to be aware that this type of event is something which has a great impact on the life of the Santa Marias and how they're going to respond to that. We hope that they respond to it in the way that the Gospel according to Spiritism recommends. So let me continue so you get an idea of what the argument is here. These happenings, obsession and subjugation, are also a consequence of the inferior nature of this globe. For if there were no evil people on the planet, then there would be no evil spirits around it either. Hence, therefore, if we are to be benevolent with our incarnate enemies, we should also treat those of them who are discarnate in a like manner. So what they're saying here, let's respond with benevolence to an event like this. Let's respond with positive energy, positive thoughts, positive actions. Knowing that this might be an obsessive process, our response as incarnates is not to respond in anger. It's to respond with benevolence. For it says here in the Gospel according to Spiritism, no one can succeed in appeasing these negative forces, influences from the spirits, except by sacrificing the hate that we might have for them, for whatever action that they're causing, and for whatever might be in our past lives which has brought upon this obsession. We should be charitable towards the spirits. Charitable. This has the effect of not only stopping them in their evil practices, but also of recovering them and bringing them back to the path of goodness, thus contributing to their salvation. In this way, the maxim from the Gospel, love your enemies, is not circumscribed to the earth and the present life, but rather forms part of the great universal laws of solidarity and fraternity among all spirits. So, we're hoping in this book that we see a positive outcome out of an obsessive process, but it would have to be through a search for spiritual values, treating this as a positive opportunity, almost like a spiritual wake-up call. Why did something like this happen? Why did a girl of only 15 suddenly turn this way? Her eyes bulge inward, and she begins this process almost of turning into almost what seems to be a monster, right? Hitting her father, creating such chaos and trauma for her family and for herself. But let's see it as an opportunity to begin to think positively, to connect to the higher realms, our spirit mentor, and recognize that there's spiritual influences going on that we may not understand. But what's important is our own response, our own thoughts, and our own actions. That's what's important. It's important for us to think positively and act charitably. From the point of view of maybe why this happened, we get a few maybe hints, but we don't exactly know, right? Why did Esther become obsessed here? Why did this happen? Well, One possibility could be that we're seeing this grand event, this grand ball, and it's so materialistic, right? It's filled with ambition. It's filled with hopes for material gain and benefit. Maybe there's something to that. We don't see here a humble event. We see here something very prideful, something very connected to the material. Another thing I'd like to draw your attention to, and it may be something you may not have even noticed. If you have the book, it's a good idea to look at that. If you don't, you might just want to listen to the chapter one more time. Are the Santa Maria's life choices and actions somehow related to what's transpired here? Do we have any hints? The action of putting on this fancy ball could have angered, maybe, a spirit connected to the Santa Marias in some kind of, either in the current life or in a past life. How did they get this money? How did they come into all this wealth? Was there someone who was effectively felt as if excluded from that in some way, shape, or form? That could be what's going on. Another thing that's kind of interesting is Colonel Santa Maria's thoughts, because remember that thoughts are a form of action. And so in our thoughts, as we're thinking, we're emitting thought forms that spirit entities understand and respond to. And in this particular case, we're seeing Colonel Santa Maria dreaming of his youth right before this event happened with Esther. And he was thinking about his ambitions. And he even mentioned his military career, the fact that he had these military ambitions. What's the connection between Colonel Santa Maria's thoughts, though, and what transpired to his own daughter? There may be something connected there, but immediately to ourselves it seems disconnected. And it certainly even would be to Colonel Santa Maria. If there is a connection between Colonel Santa Maria's thoughts and what transpired, it's certainly not apparent to us, and it's certainly not something that is immediately obvious or is something that can be quite understood. And so, by anyone involved, it seems. And so it's difficult to really piece together what exactly has happened. But the point is that there's something there. It's important for us to realize that in an obsessive process, there is an explanation through an understanding of the spiritual influences of the Santa Marias. So it's very difficult to know exactly what's happening here. But it's important for us to realize that spiritual influence is indeed more than we imagine in our lives. And so let us now begin to understand and begin to appreciate that in our own lives, how we can respond in our lives that will help us to deal with all the influences on our lives coming from incarnates and discarnates. It's really the magic formula of Jesus. Jesus taught us how to live and how to respond to events. When we think negatively, we attract that kind of energy. When we act according to ambition rather than charity, we can attract certain influences that can impact us throughout our lives. So it's very important for us to understand and look at the influences that may have transpired here. And it's a lot more that we're going to have to go through in this book to fully understand what happened. So I look forward to continuing this discussion with you, hopefully next week as well, with Carol Correa-Smith, who will be joining us as well in our discussion. So we look forward to seeing you next week.